Okay, hi there, and welcome to video 2 of session 1 in our 6-session special Head Start course on the economic crisis. In the last video, we looked at the difference between micro and macro, and here's a chance for you to think about news headlines. All of these have been taken from the newspapers and the press in recent days, and to think about whether they are essentially micro issues or perhaps macro. Now, for some of them, there's a little bit of debate, but let's see how many you can get right. Here's our first 9, and perhaps this is a chance for you to press the pause button on the video, have a think through, and perhaps just jot down on a spare piece of paper whether you think these are micro or macro. And then I'll go through them with you, and let's see how far you can get down the list, see if we share an opinion. So press the pause button, have a go at these 9 headlines. The question is micro or macro. Okay, here we go. So let's work through together. Tata Steel needs £500 million bailout as COVID halts production. My instinct is that's basically microeconomics. It's to do with the steel industry and one business in particular. Yes, the bailout is substantial and government spending is macro, but I've plumped for micro on this occasion. What about the next one? US Congress's own economists predict 15 million unemployed in 2021. What did you put for that? Again, I would think it's probably more macro because it's to do with the whole economy and a huge rise in predicted and actual unemployment in the United States. Number 3, frequent gamblers betting more despite sports lockdown, study says. What did you put for that? I would go this time for micro. It's the study of one industry, and here's an example of a newspaper headline. Although I think that girl's too close to the screen if you're asking me. Probably microeconomics. The next one. Hotels, restaurants and pubs have furloughed 80% of staff. They haven't laid them off. They've just essentially furloughed them, kept them on staff to get the government wage subsidy. What did you put for that? I've gone for microeconomics because it's essentially the hotel industry, restaurants and pubs. Next one. UK seeks to borrow 225 billion to fund a huge surge in public spending. I think that's macro because it's to do with government spending and taxes and the national debt, and those are big macro issues at the moment. Developing world economies hit hard by coronavirus. That is macro, and indeed one of the big macro issues to keep abreast of the impacts not just on developed, advanced, high-income countries, but also emerging developing countries as well. The World Bank warns of a collapse in the money sent home by migrant workers. This is called remittances, and there are many millions of people who live and work overseas. Some of whom have returned home, but many haven't, and there's been a big fall in the money they send home. You could make a case for saying that's both. The decisions by migrant workers about how much money to send home is essentially a micro issue, and it affects the incomes of households. But of course, we're talking about the whole world economy here, so it's clearly a macro side as well. Wealth tax rise could raise 174 billion to tackle COVID-19, expert says. Micro or macro? I've gone for macro. Big wealth tax rises, taxation, that's macroeconomics. And Virgin Australia slumps into administration. I think that's probably microeconomics. Keep in mind, of course, that micro and macro are closely related. So when businesses close down because of the lockdown, when businesses report lower turnover and lower profits and perhaps have to lay off some workers, those key decisions taken by businesses are microeconomics. But of course, if you aggregate, if you add everything together, they have important effects. It's important consequences for the wider macroeconomy. Okay, I'll give you another 9. See if you can go for, this time, micro, macro, or both. Again, press the pause button, take a few moments to work through this one, jot your answers down. Let's see if we agree when we go through. So we have 9 more headlines. All of these are real world headlines from the last few weeks. What do you think? Pandemic accelerates shift to meat substitutes. I've gone for micro. I thought I'd plant that in there. Essentially, it's the meat industry. Probably micro, although if it's a big enough change, it can have a macro effect. Just-in-time supply chains that keep factories running are thrown out of kilter. I've gone for micro because it's to do with individual factories. Is everybody happy with what we mean by a just-in-time supply chain? This is where products, component parts, component stock and things, raw materials, they arrive just in time. A really good example is the huge French firm Danone, a huge maker of yogurt and drinks and things. They have 8,500 workers across 13 factories and 8 logistics hubs just in France. And they pick up milk from 2,000 farmers every day. They have to have a very efficient just-in-time supply chain. Now, those just-in-time supply chains have been threatened and challenged by the crisis. Many businesses now suffering from that. What about John Lewis to reopen a factory to make gowns for the NHS? I've got micro for that. UK banks may need to put aside $5 billion to cover losses in the first quarter. Now that's banking, that's micro, but £5 billion of losses suggests a huge macroeconomic impact. So I've gone for both on that. Do we agree on that? You can make a case for saying it's micro or macro. I've gone for both. The banking sector is really struggling this year. We expect bank losses to go up. Can you think of some reasons why that will happen? Perhaps an increase in the level of bad debts as businesses fail to repay loans. And of course, if the banks suffer badly, the financial system takes a hit, that's going to have a macroeconomic effect as well. These are the leading banks in the UK by share of profit. HSBC took 84% of all the profits made by commercial banks in 2018, followed by Lloyds and Barclays and the UK government-owned RBS. And if you look at the value of banks on the stock market, one of those key macro indicators, again, HSBC is twice as big in terms of market cap as the next bank, which happens to be Spanish, Banco Santander. Virgin Money, of course, is in there, as that's one of the new challenger banks you may have seen operating in the market. Okay, America's fracking boom founders as global prices and demand collapse. What are we going for there? My instinct is to say that's probably both. Yes, it's the fracking industry, which is micro, but it's about the global economy, it's about world oil prices, and clearly that's going to have big macroeconomic effects for America's energy sector and other industries as well. Will shoppers return to the high street after the lockdown? What do you think about that one? I've gone macro. The decision again of shoppers to return is micro, but there are millions of us, and our decisions about whether to return and spend as and when shops start to open and keeping social distancing going, that is going to have a huge effect on the macroeconomy. Consumer spending is nearly 2/3 of all the spending that takes place in the British economy. Half of SMEs, half of small and medium-sized enterprises in the UK will run out of cash in 12 weeks. Fine survey. What do we think? I've gone both. SMEs, small businesses, micro, but hundreds of thousands of small businesses, and if they all run out of cash, or half of them do, that is going to have a huge macroeconomic effect across the country. And the last one, let's see if we agree on this one. Plane maker Airbus furloughs 3,200 staff. I've gone micro. It's a decision the Airbus business is making. But of course, if they furlough over 3,000 staff, then in theory that has quite a big effect on government spending, for example. So there we go. A chance there for you to look at the difference between micro and macro using a whole number of economics headlines.